Yes. Next up, we have our second invited talk from Benjamin Horn. Ben, if you join us at the front.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here with you today to talk about a couple of my favorite things, Genshin Impact and food, in combination with each other. So a little bit of a table of contents here. Our plan for this particular talk. I'm talking about the inspiration behind it before addressing kind of the research question that I developed for this, going into the thesis to respond to the research question, some of the methodology, a short literature review before I dive into sort of the different systems related to the food and Genshin Impact, the recipes and the regions, and then talking about it in relation to the narrative. So this is kind of our plan, a plan of action. Inspiration for this. This was partly inspired by finding this post on the Reddit. Does everything in this game center around meals? Asks this online commentator. And reading this, I was struck by the fact that there is a foregrounding of food in Genshin Impact, which I think is quite unique when you compare it to a lot of other games of its ilk, so kind of 3D action-adventure kind of games. Food is quite foregrounded. Paimon and the Traveler are usually hungry. Someone's usually mentioning food. Paimon especially is always asking when the next meal is. Another inspiration behind this talk was the fact that my partner also studies food culture, so this was also sort of an inspiration for me. I was interested in why all this food in Genshin Impact, and then why is it foregrounded? This only became, at the time of this particular post, these characters were not released. These are two of the gacha characters you can collect in Genshin Impact. If anyone knows a character on the left, or my left, that's Verisa. Anyone pulled for Verisa? We got a couple of Verisa pullers. 3 Verisa, you'd love to see it. So Verisa, one of the main themes of this character is that she eats a lot. She's sort of a wrestler, but she's also like a competitive eater. So one of the main themes of her is she just eats. Character on my right, your left, would be Escoffier, who is, of course, named after the French chef Auguste Escoffier. And you can tell her whole thing is like she's a French chef, right? She's from Fontaine. She's very good at cooking. Even her animations are around cooking the enemy. Anyone got Escoffier? She's very good in the skirt team, which many of you will know is a meta kind of team. So, so these characters were released after this particular post, but it only goes to continue to highlight the importance of food within Genshin Impact. So what is the meaning of the food in Genshin Impact? Why is it foregrounded so significantly? These are the kind of questions. So I've been doing this maybe for kind of a year and a half, a couple of years now. I first presented on it in Chinese Digra, I think, a couple of years ago. And this has gone through various stages. So I've done a little bit of research on this at this particular point. So I'm arguing that Genshin promulgates a particular Chinese perspective on food that homogenizes various in-game cultures, even if the food presented is different, highlighting the challenges of regional food branding in a globalized world. So let's kind of unpack this. Methodology, I did a close reading / playing of Genshin Impact, inspired by Cleant Brooks, who is one of the new critics from America, who talked about close reading. I didn't put a picture of Espen Arseth, but I don't need to put a picture of Espen Arseth. He's right here. Playing Methodology, 2003. Play the games that you want to research. And I was also informed by studies of food and games when I was doing my literature review. Place branding. Place branding defined as the broad set of efforts by country, regional, and city governments and by industry groups aimed at marketing the places and sectors they represent. I want to introduce a couple of these concepts. So place branding. Kwiatka and Miho, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm trying my best, argue that place branding theoretically underpins gastro-diplomatic efforts by modern nation-states to make certain foods and dishes symbolic signifiers of a nation. Branding reconfigures food and food practices and puts them at service of commercial endeavors, such as attracting tourists to visit. I think the notion of culinary tourism in particular is quite relevant to Genshin Impact for some of the reasons that Heather was talking about in her presentation. As the traveler is traveling, as being a flaneur and a wanderer, exploring these different regions, they are trying different foods, and so they are engaging in a sort of culinary tourism, and as a player we are sort of going along on this journey with them. Okay, so discussing some of the systems of food in Genshin Impact, the thing about the collection of food in Genshin Impact is that you can do it forever if you want to. The food respawns every 24 hours. It's not gotchable. You can just get it. It's free, just lying out there in the environment to collect. Of course, for the meat that you need to make various dishes, you need to kill these boar. They kind of run at you, and they have like a stun lock. It's very annoying. But there's also these birds, and this is I put this picture of this very famous bird killing point. This is where you go to kill your birds to get your chicken, or fowl, as the English translation may be. Or you can go and collect these vegetables across the environment. Van Weegen talks a little bit about how this perpetuates a myth of the endless bounty of nature. You know, we can always go to nature. Nature will always have food and meat and things for us to get. It will always come back, right? There's this kind of myth that's being perpetuated by Genshin with this kind of food system. It never runs out. You can always get it if you want it. This is some of the recipes, and boy, they look good. So each of them has these kind of bespoke illustrations, these different colors based on a rarity system: gray, green, blue, purple, and yellow, where yellow is the highest tier. A couple of interesting things here. I think Agatha Washkiewicz has written about the idea of food porn. So the idea that in various of these different games which are representing food, the food is presented in a way that it's kind of tantalizing, right? You want to eat this. So in particular, we have Adeptus' temptation on the screen there, highlighted. And it's sparkling. Of course you want to eat this. It's literally glowing with delicious nutrients, I suppose. So I think there's a certain amount of food kind of porn, like you are being encouraged to make these dishes because they are so beautiful, because they have these bespoke illustrations. Not only that, though, I think it's interesting to note that a lot of the dishes which are kind of higher level are based around meat in particular. And Tyler talks about this in his book about meat in video games and how meat has been associated with strength. You know, you consume the flesh of the creature and you become the creature. You know, you eat the pig, you become the pig. Pig is strong, so you become strong. So a lot of I don't know what that was. I'm gonna keep talking. That was the pig. Cooking system. Have any of you played Genshin Impact? How many of you have cooked food before in Genshin Impact? This should be the number of people who played Genshin Impact, because it's introduced very quickly at the beginning of the game. It's a very simple mini game, as I'm sure many of you are familiar. This thing just moves along and then click at the orange point. It's very easy. I think that there's a simplification of the cooking system which kind of woefully misses out on representing the cultures of cooking which have developed in different places around the world. You engage with a lot of the results of the cooking practices as you go to these different regions and you get these different foodstuffs, but you don't actually make the things, right? It's always just this same little minigame. It's a very simplistic minigame. Ryan talks about this in relation to Cooking Mama and the idea of a gestural economy. There's a kind of there's a certain cultural knowledge which is being lost or not being represented here, which is a little bit disappointing, to be perfectly honest. It's interesting to note that in Oscopier's latest companion quest, there is an attempt at creating more of a robust cooking sort of minigame to engage with, because Oscopier, all of her theme is based around cooking. But still, I think it's worth highlighting that this is something which Genshin doesn't necessarily represent within its systems. I did a little bit of a count of the different recipes per region. This only goes up to Natland, so this doesn't include Nord Krai. If I was to hesitate to guess, I would say that Nord Krai has around 27 collectible recipes, because that's been the case for the last couple of regions. You might notice here that there's an outlier, and that would be the second region. That's Liyue, which is symbolic of China within the game. 61 collectible recipes. I've broken this down by different regions. The way that I did this was I went to the Genshin Impact wiki, and I looked at every single recipe from Liyue. And then the wiki is very detailed, so I really recommend going to it if you're interested in food and want to do this like I did. So I tried to connect the different dishes to different dishes. I'm also quite familiar with Chinese food culture. I eat a lot of Chinese food. My wife cooks a lot of Chinese food. I know a lot about Chinese food. So among in this particular regional cuisine being presented here, I think. It's not necessarily surprising that Cantonese food is the food that is being represented the most. Cantonese cuisine is one of the most famous of the different cuisines around China, so I don't think it's necessarily a shock to see that Cantonese food is highly represented. So why all this food? You know, the developers are going through and making all of this food for all of these different regions, and this takes a certain amount of development time to develop these dishes. Not only that, but if you look at the background of this particular image, you'll see those little hash browns, which are in the shape of paw prints. Very cute. Those are a special dish, which is related to the character Razor. There it is, from Mondstadt region. So each of the characters has a specialized version of the dish which you can cook. So why go through all this effort? You don't even gotcha for it, so they're not even making money off of it. So why are the developers taking the time to make all of this food? And I think we have to talk a little bit about these regional meals. So one of the things that you do when you go to a new region is you have these meals with usually a group of people, and it's usually at the start of the region. And I think that these meals are pretty important. One of the reasons I think these meals are important is because they introduce sort of the culinary tourism of the place you're visiting. You go to Inazuma, which is the kind of Japanese-coded region, you see sushi and hot pot, you're like, ooh, I'm in Japan, you know, and then you kind of go to Natland, you're like, tacos. Latin America, I guess. Right? So you go to these different places, you see these different foodstuffs, and you associate that. So the developers are actually using the logic of nation branding food to attract players to pick up the game again after each major update. One of the things that they're selling is go to the new region, see the food, right? It's this kind of culinary tourism approach to selling these different regions. Another thing about these regional meals is that they introduce the cast of characters that you can collect within that region. So they remind the player about past events in the narrative, they provide exposition for the new regional narrative, and they introduce us to the gotchable characters we're going to have a chance to collect. In terms of the narrative use of food in Genshin Impact and kind of the Chineseness of it, I was struck by this encounter with Navia. This is in Fontaine. One of the things that she does is she just makes a meal for you when you meet her. She's like, oh, nice to meet you. Let's eat dinner together. And it's kind of this thing. And that, to me, struck me as something that is very Chinese culturally coded. Because in China, how do you show warmth and kindness to somebody? You invite them to have food with you. That's how you show that you care. You eat with them. This isn't necessarily, I think, something that is distinctly European necessarily. I think Europeans might be more likely to have something like coffee or tea or a drink at a bar, right, rather than having something like a full meal. You can also see kind of the Chineseness of the food being used in the narrative in Liyue with this, you make an offering to Xian Yun, who is the character here, and also the character there. They're the same person. In Sumeru, how do you escape from this kind of dream, nightmarish landscape? It comes from an understanding of the candies. There's this candy minigame. How do you escape from the prison in Fontaine? Also the food. How do you find spiritual and physical balance in your life? It's all about food. It's all about food. Food is the secret. In the most recent region, Nord Krai, which is really great. So if you haven't played it, you really should. It's wonderful. In Nord Krai, how do you make a connection with this moon goddess? You give her a cake. So some of my conclusions. The presentation and function of food in Genshin is reflective of both local and global trends in food culture. the employment of nation branding marketing techniques to sell regions via their cuisine mirrors trends in culinary tourism both in China and across the globe. But the disposition of the characters and the treatment of food in the narrative draws upon a wellspring of Chinese food culture in every region, meaning that Teyvat's foods need to be understood from a Chinese cultural perspective. Some implications for developers. The food might be detailed, beautiful, and unique in its modeling, but it's not just food that makes food culture authentic. It's the people, how they act and talk around food, and how they cook, in particular, which is kind of missing from Genshin. For policymakers, seeing how nation branding is being used in Genshin could provide some sort of logic for how nations might more effectively brand their own foods. For academics, talking about a lot of food studies has relied on especially Japanese games for analysis. I think that there's a lot more to be said about these different games from, in particular, Asia. So South Korea and China should maybe come more into the discussion in terms of food culture. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Taylor Hardwick, RMIT University. Thank you. That was fantastic. I am going to admit publicly that I've never played Genshin Impact. Thanks for inviting me. And from your presentation, looking at Genshin through a food lens, I would believe only women are characters in the game. So I'm curious, could you speak about, I guess like the context of like food being women's work, and therefore welcoming being a woman's role, and how that might be, is that the case in Genshin?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Certainly these characters are, very closely associated with food. Are there male characters which are closely associated with food? Some of them. So, for example, Zhongli, who is one of the most important characters from the Chinese region. He's sort of the leader of the Chinese region, and he's a very popular figure within Genshin Impact. He is very associated with tea culture. So whenever you go and see with him, he's always invited. One of the first things that he'll do is say, come and have tea with me. And of course, tea culture is a big part of Chinese food culture. It represents sort of it's an intellectual kind of pursuit, is the drinking of tea, especially the drinking of tea and wine. Yeah. Wine's not necessarily represented in Genshin Impact, but tea is. So Zhongli is associated, so there are some characters, that's one example. There are some others, I think, which are associated with food. I don't think it's strictly it's not necessarily, when I'm showing you all of these pictures, some of it is maybe happenstance, for instance, the traveler in these images, right? This is female, but you can choose the male version. Yeah. So is it necessarily that female characters are associated more with the food? I think maybe trending towards, I would say maybe trending towards yes would be my answer to your question, but it's not necessarily exclusively the case. Yeah. But it's a great question, and I think that could be a further point for investigation, to be perfectly fair.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Do I pick? Do you pick?
Yeah, go ahead.
We noticed that there are certain characters like Ayato or Hu Tao who either cook bad food, like really bad, or there's Raiden Shogun who doesn't cook at all. Like she can't even make anything. Like, can you comment on that? Like, is there a reason for that, or just like for fun, or
I think there's a kind of playfulness in the way that some characters are associated with food. So, for example, you mentioned Ayato, who's another male character. He's one of the leaders of the Inazuma region, which is associated with Japan. And one of the things that he does with his idle animation, right, when you're in the player menu and you just let him kind of walk, is that he'll pull out a milk tea. And it's this kind of thing, like a boba kind of milk tea. And that's more like this playful homage to kind of contemporary food cultures, right? And I think that there's definitely some of this us trying to associate with modern food culture, because modern food culture, especially for a lot of young Chinese people, is very, very relevant, especially to their culinary tourism experiences. I'll offer a short example of this. At one point in time, I was traveling with some friends who were not from China, and my wife, who is Chinese. And at one point, one of my friends came to me and he said, are we going to do anything other than eat today? The only thing we were doing on that vacation was we were going to one restaurant, eating a snack, and then going to the next restaurant. So our whole trip was designed around food. And a lot of culinary tourism in China is based around that. So that just maybe indicates the importance of food to modern Chinese culture and how associating these characters with food resonates with a lot of, especially Chinese players.
Like Paimon is referred to as emergency food. Like just in case the traveler runs out of food, then there is always this person he can eat. I mean, that's what.
Yes, that's definitely one of the other playful results of the food relationship. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we also have a question online. I think we're going to take this one, so I'll just read it out to you, Ben. You stated that getting food is free in this gacha game. It's not gachable. What are the consequences of Genshin's food system simplifying the social and political dimensions of cuisine, such as labor, class, and scarcity, in favor of consumable cultural symbolism?
Kind of a leading question. It sucks. I mean, I think that Genshin is foregrounding food, and a lot of the ways that Genshin is foregrounding food has these sort of cultural roots, and especially these Chinese cultural roots, but it's also prone to the pitfalls of contemporary capitalist society, right? I mean, it is this sort of endless thing, this endless resource. So especially in regards to, environmental crises that we are facing in our world today, and the fact that we have the possibility that some people, that either our generation or a future generation might run out of food and water, which is something which is impossible. It seems impossible to imagine, but it could be possible, right? I mean, these are the sorts of myths that Genshin is perpetuating, as I mentioned, in regards to the sort of the bounty of nature here. So I completely agree with that point. In regards to the cooking as well, I think, I agree as well that the labor of cooking is being undercut. Although, as I said, there are some efforts with a character like Ostoke to kind of push back against that and to actually have some representation of cooking.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. I think we'll move on to the next talk.
Thank you.